By the end of this session, I will be able to explain how diversity and cultural competence can benefit children and families, explore my identity and my culture's effect on my values, attitudes, and behaviors, recognize how becoming culturally competent can help me to avoid stereotyping and holding unconscious bias, identify and apply culturally competent practices in my work with children and families. We live in an ever-changing world. The complexities associated with increasing cultural diversity in our communities affects the systems and agencies that deliver services to this complex and diverse population. The judicial system, particularly that of the family court, has been put in the position of providing services to a broad range of clients with a broad set of cultural and contextual challenges. Diversity is an understanding of our commonalities and our differences. These shapes in this diagram are very much alike. At the same time, they're very different. Take a moment to write down the ways they are similar and the ways in which they differ. Our differences are just as important as our similarities. Many of our differences are the result of our people groups adapting to particular geographic regions, political or educational contexts. Race is not biological, it is political and changes from nation to nation state. The diversity of our cultures is a result of trying to reach similar goals with differing resources and attitudes. Paradigm shift. A shift that needs to occur for us is to move away from asking what is wrong with you to a more motivating question, what has happened to you? It will be important for us to also shift our thinking about how we help families build on their cultural strength, problem solve within their context, as opposed to focusing on the deficits families are facing. Your ability to identify strengths in families depends partially on which lens, the resources lens or the deficits lens you use in your work with families. The lens you choose will also influence your work with others involved in the case. Using a strengths-based approach means acknowledging the resources that exist within a family, including extended family, and tapping into them. For instance, you may identify a relative who can provide a temporary or permanent home for a child. You may help a parent reconnect with a past support system, or you may identify healthy adults who in the past were important to a child or family. Using a resource lens creates more options for a resolution, and it empowers and supports children and families. Cultural consideration strengths don't look the same in every family. Family structures, rules, roles, customs, boundaries, communication styles, problem-solving approaches, parenting techniques, and values may be based on cultural norms and/or accepted community standards. For instance, in a deficit model, a family with a female head of household may be viewed as dysfunctional or even immoral. But using a resources lens, the female head of household structure is appreciated for the strength and survival skills of the mother. And there is a deeper examination of historical and institutional factors that have contributed to the existence of matriarchal families. In another example, many Western cultures believe that children should have a bed to themselves, if not an entire room. In contrast, many other cultures believe that such a practice is detrimental to a child's development and potentially dangerous. Additionally, in the United States, the idea of the nuclear family dominates. However, in many communities, extended family take on a greater role in child rearing, and family may include members of a faith community or others who are not blood relatives. People in different cultures and socioeconomic classes may use different skills and resources to deal with stress and problem. Material goods are one kind of resource, but some individuals and cultures price other resources above material wealth. What is culture? Well, we will let Andre walk us through the dimensions of culture and its relationship to context.
Context is everything. Believe it or not, there was a time when people would refer to Brazil nuts by another name. They would refer to them as the N-word toes. So you get the N-word, right? Okay, cool, cool, cool. I find that interesting because in my family system, we never called them the N-word toes. We called them Brazil nuts. After doing my research, I realized that they're more of a seed than they are a nut. But for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, Brazil nuts usually come around the holiday times, particularly in Western countries, right? So they're this 2-inch nut or inch and a half nut that is shaped like a wedge of an orange wedge, and is mahogany on the outside, very dark on the outside. And so there was a time when people would refer to that nut with that other way of speaking. And did they create, the people who were using those words, did they create that word or the use of the word? I would say that they did not. I will say that they were in a time and an environment that the world around them was using that term, and so they felt that it was the right term to use. However, if people wanted to use that term to describe those nuts today, how would we respond to them? What would we say to them about using the N-word as a part of their everyday vernacular? We would say that that is not the right thing to do, that politically correct, you shouldn't say those things, or is there another way to describe those without using that word? We would be embarrassed. And why is that? Because the context has changed. So context is everything. Context is everything. So what we know about human behavior is that people are always striving, and they're striving for three things. They're looking for safety, significance, and belonging. And when you get a group of people, that group is also looking for safety, significance, and belonging. But they have to contend with something that is oftentimes unchangeable, or in some ways, they look to manage this thing called context. And context is the geographic region, the kind of political or educational environment that we've grown up in, and it is also the time frame in which we've grown up. And so when we recognize that human beings are always dealing with this context, and what do we know about context? Time is always changing. Geographic regions adjust, and people move from different places, and that governments move at the whims of the people. So context is constantly changing. And so if people are trying to adapt their behaviors to this context, and context is constantly changing, what must people also do with their behaviors? Their behaviors must move with the context. And so when we talk about this idea of context being everything, what we recognize is that cultural shifts are actually responses to a variation in the context. And so as context changes, so must human behavior. However, the deep need for safety, significance, and belonging is still present in human interactions. So when we think about our organizations, when we think about ourselves, we must ask ourselves, are there ways in which we have been taught to, or raised or reared to see the world, to form a paradigm, a worldview that may no longer be necessary given the change in the context? And so we'll spend more time talking about why context is so important and how cultures develop out of context.
Wow. Andre did a great job explaining how culture and context are connected. As context changes, so does culture. Context demands a response, and culture is the response.